Hi, my name is Finley Watson. I'm 15 years old from Lincoln County, North Carolina. Today I'm interviewing my grandfather.
My name's Mark Beam. I'm 75 years old, born in 1950, and I live in western Lincoln County as well.
Today we have a few questions about the 1960s and the event that unfolded during that time. To start, what was your recollection of how the world was around you? What do you remember about the beginning of the 1960s? Some people like to call that the calm before the storm. And how does that representation feel to you?
Yes, I think that's probably a good description of it. I was 10 years old then. I lived with my grandparents, and we felt safe and were really concerned about the worldview. We were just concerned about what went on in Lincoln County, and that's it.
So, do you remember any of the events that happened that year? The election, Nixon and Kennedy?
Yes, do remember that. There was a lot of news about it as we had 1 hour. I think we had an hour. They might just had 30 minutes of national news, and that's all we had. So we didn't have the 24-hour system that we have now, where news is constantly on. So we could watch the news. Mainly, I was just interested in meet my buddies and playing at that time. But I did hear a lot about the election because my grandparents. Well, first of all, Lincoln County was heavily in favor of the Democrats as opposed to Republicans then. So pretty much anything I heard was people, my grandparents talking, or my father talking about the Democrats and what they were going to do when they got elected, that kind of stuff. So, but I did hear about Nixon and Kennedy running, and it was kind of a shock, I think, when he won.
Yeah, it was a closer election that a lot of people remember today, and whenever we think about that, uh, we kind of forget that it was very close,
Yes.
and kind of a surprise that they had a winner and they were sure about it. Yeah.
Yes, that's true, and it was. They did have the debates. They were on TV, which was a big thing back then. That was maybe the first time they had them on TV ever, and it was really that went in Kennedy's favor because just the way they looked on TV.
So, how did you feel when, or how did the people around you, your family, feel whenever the results came in and Kennedy had won?
I think they were happy. Like I said, I mentioned. Well, my grandfather was a Democrat, and most all our neighbors were, and my grandmother was a Republican. So there were a few Republicans around, but they didn't argue and fight about it. It was just I don't even know how they voted. They didn't really talk about it. So I think they were happy.
Just a few years after that, after Kennedy was elected in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And what did you hear about it at that unfolded, and what were your views and concerns and the concerns of the people around you at that time?
I think basically what we heard on the news was that it was happening and that it was very dangerous that we might have a nuclear war because of it. And but again, then again, after that, it was like life just went on. It's like that stuff was happening so far away from us that I'm sure possibly my parents and grandparents worried about it as far as the nuclear war, but it wasn't something we discussed. Yeah, probably not. Not very little. We might have said a few things about it, but it was almost not discussed at all, and life just went on.
In November of 1963, just a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy was assassinated during a public event that was widely broadcasted. How did you find out about the president's death, and where were you when it happened?
I was in the seventh grade, and we were in the gymnasium at Northbrook Elementary, and playing basketball. And somebody came in and said something to Mr. Kaiser, who was our coach and teacher, and he said everybody sit down, had us sit down in the gym, and then he told us that President Kennedy had just been shot. and that we were just going to sit there a while, and we just thought that was pretty, that was terrible. But then I don't know. Then one of the eighth graders came in and whispered to Mr. Mr. Kaiser that Mr. Kennedy had died. So we were pretty, I would say amazed, and thought it was a terrible thing, anything like that happened. So then we went home. Then we stayed in school and got the bus, went home, and of course my grandparents had a little country store, and a lot of the farmers would congregate in there, and they were talking about it. And by that time, I have to say, from what I heard, some of them saying they were not unhappy that it happened. So I thought, okay, here we go. But then after a few days, oh yes, and then we went back to my mother was living in Charlotte. We went back to Charlotte, and then they showed the funeral, and it was really touching and very, very sad. And we all hated it. Just that it was a terrible, terrible event. The only other thing too, we were watching when Jack Ruby came in and shot the assassin. I can't remember his name right now. Oswald, in the basement of the, and that was mind blowing. And I believe that was on a Sunday, or the funeral was on a Sunday. So it was all broadcast all day long, pretty much. So I remember thinking, well, I guess I won't get to watch football games today because funeral's on. But that was again, that was a 13-year-old. What did I know?
So, just in the year after Kennedy was assassinated, the fight for civil rights took stage in D.C., and we saw the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed by LBJ, and we saw the advancement of that in action. Other than protest, it was now a real legislative action that had been taken for the first time in years. There had been no advancements in civil rights. And how do you remember the people around you feeling about that? And what was the coverage like that, and how do you think that kind of came across to the country?
Yes, I think the people around in the around us at that time that came in the store, they weren't real happy with it. I was about 14 then, and I still wasn't really, like I said, we didn't have a lot of TV to watch, so I wasn't really getting a lot of news. So we just continued to go out and play football, whatever we did, whatever season it was. And it was, I knew it was an amazing thing because it was constantly on TV, and of course Martin Luther King had been on TV a bunch, and so I knew it was a big deal. But again, it didn't really affect us that much that I knew of, and so we just moved on.
So during the post 1964 Civil Rights Act era, just around the 1964 election, during the continued escalation of war protests against the Vietnam War. What do you remember about the scene then?
Yes, that's right. We started hearing about it again in the newspapers and on TV a lot. They talked about all the protests that were going on and how violent some of them were getting. But we didn't have that around here. So again, it just seemed like it was happening way off somewhere, maybe in another country. But we were kind of watching it and thinking how terrible that people were actually getting killed and burning up their businesses, and it was just amazing to watch. But again, we just thought, I think our attitude was, well, there's nothing we can do about it, and we just moved on and lived our lives.
So a few years later, after the civil rights kind of heyday in the mid 60s. We saw an interesting point in American politics when, with the 1968 election, with Richard Nixon coming back, Johnson dropping out, and Humphrey being subbed in. What do you remember about that time?
I remember Johnson. I've been hearing about it, reading about it, that he had decided not to run, and that really, really messed up. A lot of people were all concerned because, again, we were not in the county was mainly Democrats. I don't know what percentage, but a large percentage was Democrats. Just an aside, if you wanted to work for the county, it'd be a good idea to make sure your registration was a Democrat, because it could mean you didn't get hired. So the Democrats, I think, were not real happy with Humphrey in our area. They were not. They thought Nixon had done okay. A lot of them didn't like the civil rights thing, but it was just a landslide for Nixon, and I think some of the people were not too unhappy with that, because they didn't particularly like Humphrey. And in our area, the people that came in the store that I heard talk about it, we had a couple real big, really strong Democrats, and they were really into politics, and they'd come in the store sometimes, and you could listen to them talk. But that was about it for me. Again, president, I didn't feel like president really affected me one way or the other, so I was good with it.
So, throughout the 1960s, we saw a lot of spikes in hotness in the Cold War, in Vietnam and other wars that America would get involved in, and kind of espionage going on between the U.S. and the Soviets. In what ways do you think it affected people at home, and how did they think about it?
It affected, I'm sure it affected the parents and our grandparents, because since then you often read that was hanging over everybody, but it wasn't discussed again in our house much. It was, it was just, again, like us happening somewhere else, and we're not weren't a very political family, so I thought about it sometimes a little bit, but it was just so big and something that we couldn't control, so we didn't really discuss it. It was on the news a lot, though, and in the newspaper.
So one of the last major events of the 1960s, and one of the key moments of the Cold War, is when the U.S. Lands a man on the moon. What do you remember about that when it happened, and how did you hear about it, and did you watch it live?
Yeah, we read about it in the newspapers, and we were happy. We thought, well, that's great, because I think what was Sputnik or whatever, the Russians had gotten up first, and that said we were way behind, and that they were way ahead of us, and they were going to have all kind of nuclear devices and be firing them from space. We did hear that a lot, and the fact that we beat them to the moon was a big thing. I think everybody was really happy with it, especially in our area. They were very happy with it, and that was a great thing.
So throughout the 1960s, it was really very turbulent. It had a lot of ups and downs, and it's sometimes looked back on as a time of peace, even though it had Vietnam, secret nuclear bombing, testing, and issues domestic and foreign. The country was divided and united depending on the year. What do you think people today can learn from looking back at the 60s?
Yeah, I read not too long ago that there were like 400 or 500, maybe more than that, bombings during that time, and that really blew me away, because of course we didn't, that I can remember, we didn't have any in Lincoln County, so it's just people just have to get together and have to realize that you have to negotiate things, and not be so far left or so far right. You've got to live and let live, and work together. That's all it is.
Do you think it's the same today as it was in the 60s, that people have gotten too in touch with certain events that didn't affect them as much as they acted like it did, or would blow certain issues out of the water in some way just to make it a problem? And do you think that's made our country more divided?
I think so. I think the news, the 24-hour news, has been part of it. I think people can go on the internet now and they can go down a rabbit hole, and some of them never get back out of it. So I think that's a problem. I really do. I think a lot of people they'll get on the internet and just say anything, but in person they wouldn't say that. So I think that's a big problem. I don't think what you're going to do about it. I don't have any idea. But back then we were having bombings on a regular basis. I mean, they were blowing up just constantly. So I don't think it is really as bad as it was back then. I think it's bad. I think we're getting all, people are just not negotiating, just don't want to compromise at all, and that's bad. I think that's terrible, and so that's the main thing. We've got to get people in Congress that will negotiate and compromise, because that's how it works. That's how democracy works. You can't just have everything your way all the time. It's just not going to work that way. That's a dictatorship. So, but I do think it's probably worse back then because of all the riots, all the bombings, all the assassinations. They were worse back then.
Alright, well, that's all the questions I've written down.
So, thank you, and it's been good talking to you.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Finley. I enjoyed it.
Alright, see ya.
High five.